succulent.
If you have any love for the craft of filmmaking, the ingenuity that goes into making dreams and nightmares come true on screen, the original Evil Dead films easily make for one of the coolest trilogies in all of cinema.
See this? This is my Boomstick!
These movies are kind of a testament that you can go pretty damn light on characters and plot so long as you have the pizzazz. It's like every 20 seconds there's a shot or sequence or special effect that makes me think, damn, that's really cool.
Groovy.
It also helps that these movies are not just a masterclass in horror, building tension, or utilizing practical effects, but also they're insanely funny. Bruce Campbell's charisma stats are maxed out here as the Evil Dead dares to ask, what if Buster Keaton had a chainsaw for a hand? I think what's also kind of fascinating about Evil Dead is that the series sits in this weird bubble between cult film and mainstream. Successful enough to be a beloved franchise across many different forms of media decades later with reboots and modern entries, but still not quite ubiquitous. It's one of those IPs that never quite became a household name but is still well regarded. Enough so that it got a Commodore 64 game in 1984, only 3 years after the first movie's release. Sure, it may not look like much right now, but look closer, and you'll see they even included the swinging bench from the movie. That is adorable. But it wouldn't be until the 2000s that Evil Dead would rise again, in the realm of gaming with Evil Dead Hail to the King for PS1. With enough strides taking place in the 3D action horror genre in that time with titles like Alone in the Dark and Resident Evil, it was time for Evil Dead to show these kids how it's done. Maybe.
Sobar, Gata, Los Gata, Rata. Oh, ouch. All right, who wants some?
Hail to the King starts off with Ash and his new girlfriend Jenny heading back to the original cabin where he saw his friends get mutilated. I don't know, to face his trauma or some shit. I know the official explanation for Evil Dead 2's opening is it's merely a non-canon recap of the first, but I like to think it's just some weird coping ritual he does at this point. And of course, the Evil Dead awaken yet again, Jenny gets tooken, and we get the return of Evil Ash.
Oh yeah, it's happening. It's happening in a big way. Now if you'll excuse me, duty calls.
Right off the bat, this is very decisively a spin on Resident Evil's mechanics. You got tank controls, a very limited inventory as you go explore the horrors of the woods as PS1 Bruce Campbell, who I gotta say they did a decent enough job with in terms of likeness given what they were working with. He do be looking like Long-Face Ash from Army of Darkness every now and then, but that's okay, because we also get Bruce Campbell lending his voice here, with even a whole button dedicated to his cornball quips.
Bring it on. You're going down. Come to Papa. Who's laughing now, you primitive screwhead? Hey, what's that you got on your face?
Here you got your axe, a pistol, and of course your classic boomstick and chainsaw.
Hey, does that hurt? Try this.
A solid arsenal of weapons, but you are not really a badass here. Not in this game. You are fighting for your life here, against these overpowered deadites that infinitely respawn and take ages to kill. And with health pickups, ammo, and fuel for your chainsaw being so limited, a lot of your best bet is to just book it and it gets spooky in here. Look at the production of all those mind-boggling effects.
Groovy.
Hail to the King does a pretty good job nailing the tone of Evil Dead. The atmosphere is dreadful, you're constantly vulnerable and underpowered, scavenging for any ammo you can find through these confusing mazes. These first few hours here are pretty brutal, and you'll either see that as a good thing or a bad thing. On one hand, not the worst thing in the world for a horror game, but combat-wise, it can get pretty repetitive. Essentially, it feels like you're just bashing two action figures together. Ammo is too scarce, so oftentimes you do gotta get up close and personal, and there's just no rhythm to this combat combat where you can ever walk away without taking any damage. You're constantly needing to be stocking up on medkits, foraging for these little mushrooms that replenish your health. Ooh, Ash does have a little hammer dance sidestep he can do, but it's not really useful, especially with these tank controls or when multiple enemies gang up on you. Oh, and to save your game, it's pretty similar to the typewriters in Resident Evil, except here you're pretty fittingly using tapes.
Groovy.
But these two are also limited, and a lot of times you're going to be doing long stretches of the game all over. Meaning every second I do the hammer dances, Brucey, I'm fighting for my life in a high-stakes game of please don't make me have to do this again. It's not all helpless, finding the right path and resources to give you a fighting chance against the ensuing horror, all with Bruce Campbell's quips, did alleviate some of the tension, and once you whittle a Deadite to low health, you do get a cool combo where you can impale them with your chainsaw before blowing their head off.
Try this. Oh, ouch.
What I do find really fascinating here is Disc 2.
Here we go again. I'm coming for you, baby.
We're halfway through the game, Ash once again gets jettisoned into the past, this time in the year 730. Now at this point I had nothing left, hardly any health, ammo, fuel. Disc 1 ran me through the mud. And before I knew it, I was back to running from the PS1's mind-boggling effects. But eventually you do unlock weapon upgrades and areas to save, health and ammo becomes way more abundant. By design, you become way more capable against these Deadites to the point where now there's moments where they're fleeing from you. It's still difficult, it still has some brutal moments, but for the most part, you're the king, baby.
Oh, ouch.
Clearly, Disc 1 is meant to mirror the vibes of Evil Dead 2, while Disc 2 was evoking Army of Darkness, with both following a very similar premise. It's pretty impressive that not only did they manage to capture and cater to both facets of the franchise in one game, but the devs also utilized resource management as a way to let you, the player, get to experience Ash's character arc, going from being vulnerable and severely underpowered while navigating an absolute nightmare to a more self-assured, confident, and well-equipped warrior. Brilliant, but you still gotta deal with the combat, which isn't the best. Getting more ammo and better weapons in Disc 2 just kinda only further exposes how simple and repetitive it can be, while the horror sections in Disc 1 can often feel too cheap and too unforgiving, where it can dip into feeling more monotonous than scary.
You're a little old to be a Wolverine, but then again, we seem to be running low on new recruits.
Thanks, but no thanks, Doughboy. My scouting days are over. And so are yours.
Hail to the King does throw you a bit of a bone with these boss fights, with most being pretty straightforward and easy relative to everything else. I think if the game introduced some mid-range upgrades early on and maybe some sort of lock-on system, that would have definitely spiced things up a bit quicker. But if there's one thing I love about this game, it's the ending. You defeat Evil Ash once again, save your girlfriend for once, and return back to the present. Only to find out the Necronomicon has now been mass-produced as a bestseller alongside a little Harry Potter parody.
No. No!
Which brings us to our sequel, Evil Dead Fistful of Boomstick. Now, usually with these sort of licensed games released on completely different console generations, made by entirely different dev teams years later, my expectations of them actually having any sort of continuity are super low. But to my surprise, Fistful of Boomstick actually does build off Hail to the King, taking place years later with Ash's girlfriend dying off-screen from a bus crash. Okay. I'm sorry. The society has largely dismissed Ash to be a crackpot, watching helpless as the nefarious Professor Eldridge reads pages of the Necronomicon on live TV.
Wait. What the hell are you doing? Don't play it. Don't play that. Taste dropper. Mantos. Nosferatus. Make mine a double.
Unlike Hail to the King, Fistful of Boomstick is strictly a much more action-oriented Evil Dead game. The moment-to-moment gameplay, even at a glance, would probably come off as a major improvement to most people. Finally, yes, we get a lock-on system, and you get some nice little details that can feel pretty slick, like Ash aiming over the shoulder when you target enemies rushing you from behind. You have a more exaggerated and a bit of a cartoonish art style with Ash looking absolutely deranged, and almost like a 3D version of a Saturday morning cartoon we never got. They somehow did it. They somehow completely wiped all the handsome off Bruce Campbell, but thankfully his voice is still here. The quit button even makes a return.
Hey, nice complexion for a freak.
Levels here are also pretty large, with a lot of wide open space as you face off against some seemingly never-ending waves of Deadites. It's kind of fun to see Evil Dead approach this sort of small town setting, and seeing the Book of the Dead wreak havoc on a scale much larger than a cabin in the woods. Story-wise, it feels like the natural conclusion to what an Army of Darkness follow-up could have been like, and think, what could drive a completely unhinged Ash somehow even more over the edge after time traveling and being spat out of hell, just to return to a world that completely disregards him and is incapable of understanding what he just went through. Once again, he's surrounded by primitives, now only in his own time. Premise-wise, perfect. Everything else, though, Every level is basically a super shallow sandbox with some really flat design. You're practically navigating a bunch of wide, simple hallways while enemies constantly swarm you. Hail to the King did this to effectively corral you to different areas, or to flee and rethink your approach. Here, you can handle them perfectly fine. This sort of smooth brain combat is fun for a few minutes, but within these large levels, it gets mind-numbingly repetitive. Ash practically has no maneuverability mid-combat. When you block, there's a delay before you can attack again, and you don't get any dodge roll or sidestep. You don't even get a little pathetic hammer dance. Your only real play early on against these Deadites is to constantly attack, walk away momentarily, and then attack again. I don't know about you, but that's probably the most uninteresting way to create space in a game like this. It just kind of feels like you're playing a game with like a piece or two missing. If Hail to the King was meant to be a riff on Resident Evil, then it's natural to think maybe Fistful of Boomstick should have taken a few notes from something like Devil May Cry. You know, maybe not as floaty or combo driven, but again, I think just giving Ash a simple roll or sidestep while locking on would have gone a long way at making the combat more engaging. Like, I know, it's not really Ash's style to do a ton of backflips and fired pistols to ragdoll enemies and motorcycles midair, but chronologically in his story this late in the game, he's definitely proven he's a doofus who's got some tricks up his sleeve. Like a little roll, I seen him do it. Things do improve a bit when you get access to more weapons and a book of spells, powered by the green floating souls of the dead you collect mid-combat. You got things like going Big Bruce mode, possessing the souls of Deadites, summoning a Deadite doggy to fight by your side, and a lightning spell that acts as a really useful crowd control move.
Batu and Pator. Doesn't it suck to suck lead?
Each little spell comes with a button combo you gotta do and an energy requirement, and I gotta say, I love doing this. Scrambling to enter the right combination while a horde of Deadites sprint towards you was a lot of fun to me, and added a nice little dose of variation to a pretty repetitive combat system. Even messing the spell up proved to be pretty fun.
Convo,
Later on, Ash is yet again thrust to different eras of time, and this was definitely the most memorable part of the game by far. You end up in the late 1600s where everyone says, hey, you're the town blacksmith. And of course, you meet the town blacksmith who ends up being one of Ash's ancestors. Oh, and if helping colonial America fight off Deadites wasn't enough, you travel in time yet again to the Civil War, bunkering down with both Union and Confederate soldiers engulfed in a battle with a rising army of Deadites. Now, if we remember in Army of Darkness, Ash being the bumbling and charismatic hero he was able to unite two warring factions in medieval times to join forces against the undead. Now, given that this is the Civil War we're talking about here, I don't know if the same thing could possibly happen. Oh my god, it does! Yep, Fistful of Boomstick has you storm a bunker leading an army of both Union and Confederate soldiers to face off against a bunch of Deadite monstrosities, and honestly, It's awesome. Oh yeah, you ride into battle with a Gatling gun and place to your chainsaw. Where did Ash get a Gatling gun in Civil War times? He got it by supplying his blacksmith ancestor with the tools for it back in the 1600s, where it was then passed down for generations to another of Ash's ancestors, who just happens to be a Union general. That's just one of the fun ways Fistful of Boomstick plays around with time travel. Another similar details in the first level where you get a key to open this old church, which ends up being one of the key landmarks that consistently reappears in levels set in colonial America and the Civil War. And yes, that same key in your inventory ends up working here too. That's a pretty fun idea. For as much as Fistful of Boomstick does improve over Hail to the King, I do think some of the soul was lost in the effort to make this one way more straightforward and action-packed. You just don't really get much of that horror tone, and it really wasn't until the very last level that I did feel even remotely vulnerable, where I was struggling to find health and ammo while enemies were constantly rushing me and respawning non-stop. Any sense of difficulty here largely comes from the game randomly being completely obtuse. If you look up Fistful of Boomstick, you'll find a bunch of posts online dating back even from when this game was brand spanking new over 20 years ago, made by a bunch of desperate folks saying, "Stuck, help," and I don't blame them one bit. Even in one of the first areas of the game, you have to go into this strip club, but the cops won't let you, blocking both entrances. How typical. They tell you to go speak to the captain if you want to go through. You go to the captain, he says you're not getting through without a badge, you find the badge, he lets you through, you talk to the cops guarding the strip club again, and they still say, "Nah man, I can't let you through, chainsaw for a hand, through suspicious. Have you tried talking to the captain?" "Yeah, talk to the captain, well maybe we'll let you through." "Hey, aren't you the guy in the human sprite at 3? But all the captain has to say at this point is go into the strip club and kill the deadites in the outside patio. At this point, I'm like, maybe the game's bugged? No, you have to find a stick of dynamite, throw it over the wall into the strip club, which will then trigger a cutscene wiping out all the deadites. Usually when I have to resort to looking up stuff like this, I get pretty mad at myself, but here, thank God we have technology. And even that's nothing compared to the way levels will by design have areas and items and characters phase in and out of existence depending on what you've done so far and who you've talked to, even though your objectives are typically open-ended. What this means is you can be running around looking for something you were told to look for that hasn't even spawned yet because you didn't do the thing you didn't know about yet. You feel me? For example, one thing this game loves to do in many levels to pad out length is introduce these deadite vortexes that infinitely spawn enemies and can only be closed by using a piece of silver. Here, I need to do that first before I can finally get into the city museum, where my next objective is. I find the last piece of silver in this exact spot. Remember this, faithful viewer. And then I head all the way back to the museum, except for whatever reason, I still can't get in. The objective is crossed off, so I don't know what's up. Oh, my bad. I was supposed to give an old gold watch to a professor I saved at this university earlier who told me to be on the lookout for an old gold watch, which I wasn't able to find for the last 2 hours even though I scoured the entire level because it only shows up after, and only after, you've closed all the vortexes. And guess where the old gold watch spawns? In the exact same spot where the final piece of silver was that I needed to close all the vortex. The final boss, though, ends up being a nice little layup where we yet again get a twist ending, where we find out Ash once more fumbled the words for the Book of the Dead and sent himself back in time to feudal Japan. Essentially, everything we've just played through is just Ash retelling this story to an emperor who has no plans of letting him live. That's right, this whole game is a setup to what sounds like a much cooler game that we'll never get. Instead, we got Evil Dead Regeneration just 2 years later, and rather than continuing off Fistful of Boomstick, Regeneration plants us as Ash amid the best scene in Evil Dead 2. And my god, what an improvement. An actual dodge and roll mechanic, fun combos with your chainsaw and boomstick, ragdolling enemies in midair with a pistol, what?
That had to hurt.
Like, I know it's not really Ash's style to do a ton of backflips and fire pistols to ragdoll enemies midair. oh, we got a banger. The gameplay here just immediately feels so much more comfortable and gratifying than the last two games, while also maintaining both a horror and comedic tone.
What was that? You can't believe you just got your ass kicked by a one-handed nut job? What? Oh, you think I'm your daddy? Listen up, Shake and Bake. I eat evil for breakfast and danger for dinner, so spread the word. Ash is back in business.
The premise here is a pretty bold move too. Regeneration completely retcons the ending of Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness in its entirety, and posits what would happen if instead of getting sent to medieval times, Ash gets sent to a psych ward unable to answer for all the murders he suspiciously managed to survive. Of course, you again have a villain obsessed with the Necronomicon, attempted to unleash the evil dead to consume the world, while you as Ash have to rescue your lawyer who possesses the only evidence to prove you innocent.
You know, I bet you'd be some kind of a knockout if you traded in the granny wear for thigh-high stockings and a bra that pushed up your yams. Yams? Oh, baby smooth, Ashanova.
You again have a lot of fun combos and executions, and your arsenal of weapons are a ton of fun here too. On top of your classic boomstick and chainsaw combo, you also get things like a rocket launcher, flamethrower, and ooh, you get this hook shot thing that pulls an enemy so you can blast their heads off point blank. Whereas similar games like God of War or Devil May Cry typically have you trying to hit the highest combos for upgrades and unlockables, here, there's really nothing like that. You're simply doing it for the love of the game. And it's pretty fun to experiment, pull off new tricks, and just see how high you can make these Deadites fly. To mix things up even further, you can also tap into Evil Ash mode. Yeah, you know what this is. This is like your equivalent to the Spartan Rage, or turning into a werehog, or whatever. A brief window of time where you're ultra-powered to just blindly rage. You realistically can go the entire game without ever needing to use this. Regeneration's pretty easy and straightforward as is, but that's not even the end of it.
Professor Nobi? What the—
You will go to the Dagobah system.
No, the real twist to Regeneration is that it's sort of a buddy duo game.
Nice mug. Any relation?
Why do you gotta keep busting my balls?
Think a deranged take on something like Jack and Daxter. A wisecracking Bruce Campbell, I guess, wasn't enough to carry an entire game anymore, so we get Sam, your half-human, half-deadite companion voiced by his namesake's brother, Ted Raimi.
Yeah!
Nice park job, Runt.
Hey, what I lack in precision to make up for in pizzazz.
Now, when I saw Sam on the cover of the game, I thought he was going to be like a common enemy type, or maybe like a major character that pops up every now and then, but no, he is here to stay the entire way through, which you're either going to love—
What are you, a gossiping housewife?
or absolutely despise. And look, developing a character that's intentionally annoying without making him completely insufferable is always going to be a major challenge, and you know what? I think they did a pretty good job. He did eventually grow on me the same way he does with Ash. Rather than just being a little funny cartoon ferret glued to your shoulder that maybe one day might get his own PSP game, we see, Sam actually is a major part of the gameplay, being your annoying companion in combat you're meant to kick around. Literally.
Oh, it's a three-pointer.
You kick him onto Deadites. Ash can also briefly take control of him to travel through small openings like little Lego Star Wars children, and he can commandeer and ride these giant Deadite monstrosity things, which is pretty fun. As much as I didn't mind Sam, I do gotta wonder, why? He seems more like a character that typically would be best popping up in a few levels before moving on. And that kind of reveals a pretty glaring issue with Regeneration. It takes the few good ideas it has and spreads them so thin across the entire game, slowly burning a lot of its goodwill. Like early on in one of the first levels, there's this big demon Cyclops thing blocking your path, and in order to pass, you need to feed him 3 undead souls. This essentially turns into 3 tiny escort missions where you have to protect Sam from an onslaught of Deadites as he carries the soul back to the Cyclops so you can kick him into its mouth.
Wait a sec!
so that eventually he falls asleep and lets you pass. Not my favorite structure to a level, but I thought, you know what, it's fun enough. But the third level in a row where I ran into this stupid big ugly thing, I thought, oh, this is just what the entire game is. Every level is gonna be this. I don't know why they went all in on this stupid mechanic, what essentially would be like a throwaway filler section in most games. That's why so much of this game, as fun as it could be, just ended up bleeding together for me. It's sad because Regeneration didn't need to be this way. I enjoyed a lot of what this game was putting down. I like the humor and banter between Ash and Sam, but it so strangely loses a lot of its focus. Even with more weapons under my belt, I found myself often missing the earlier levels of the game.
Oh, come on! Let me out of here!
Like the one where you play as Ash escaping the psych ward. That level had such a great sense of atmosphere. It felt like classic Evil Dead. And the gameplay was so much more enjoyable here, even without having your chainsaw, just doing combos with Ash's little nub, simply because it was way more focused.
Finally, some good luck. Son of a... Gah! Oh, why you...
You weren't bogged down by Sam inserting himself mid-battle and disrupting your momentum, or having to do these repetitive escort sections. It was you focusing on chaining together combos while trying to survive and traverse an unsettling environment, slowly watching it unravel as you descend deeper and deeper into the absolute madness. It was perfect. Instead, Regeneration sticks to the same blueprint each level, and I have to imagine it was because of what was probably a very rushed development cycle. Don't get me wrong, Regeneration is still a game I think is very much worth playing. It's not long enough to completely burn itself out. You get a pretty goofy and entertaining dynamic between Ash and Sam, and gameplay-wise, at its core, it's probably the best of the bunch. So, what you have here is a trilogy of games with a sporadic offering of different highs and lows. Hail to the King will probably be hated by most, but it's the best of the bunch at being a survival game, making you feel vulnerable. Fistful of Boomstick, while repetitive, I guess I'd say has the best sense of scale, while being the most action-packed and maybe memorable, while Regeneration is probably the most well-rounded overall, with the most refined gameplay and a much more involved narrative. And after this trilogy, it was pretty much all quiet for Evil Dead video games, aside from a few mobile titles. Oh, but of course that was until we got our obligatory asymmetrical horror game, Evil Dead the Game, from 2022. Hey, did you like Dead by Daylight? Well, here's every horror IP turned into pretty much the same game. And as much as I love the Evil Dead, I just really had no interest in playing this one. It's just not for me. It always feels like these games have the shelf life of unrefrigerated milk. And as it so happens, first night playing, I couldn't find a match, but thankfully you do get these single player missions here. It is what you'd expect from a multiplayer centric game, super bare bones presentation, but with levels and objectives that highlight different characters and moments across the films and the Ash vs. Evil Dead TV show. You know what, gameplay wise, I really enjoyed it. We have come a long way from the PlayStation's effects of the Mayan Boggle. This is an over-the-top visceral game with tons of blindingly gory executions, and they really nailed the horror atmosphere here.
Time to go to sleep.
Like a much more advanced version of Hail to the King, you're scavenging for different weapon pickups and ammo. Combat is pretty basic, but still a ton of fun. Your guns here feel appropriately powerful and super satisfying. Everything from your trusty boomstick to even things like a crossbow. Turning around only to see a deadite sprinting at me while I scrambled to blow its brains off did have me properly spooked. It was a pretty good time, and I was eventually able to get into a match and roll up with a big squad of Bruceys, and the novelty just wore off for me pretty quickly. It's not bad at all, again, just really not what I'm looking for out of an Evil Dead game. It is super commendable, the attention to detail here with the atmosphere and the content. Everything here feels like such a great basis for what could be a fantastic modern single-player Evil Dead game. I don't know how likely it'd be to happen at this point, but maybe one day. And damn, what do you know, before I could even finish that sentence, a new Evil Dead game just came out. Yep, not even kidding. Retrorealms Ash vs. Evil Dead, an over-the-top 2D side-scroller just dropped out of nowhere, alongside a similar take of the Halloween movies, pretty clearly meant to be the first of many horror IPs that are gonna get this treatment, with the presentation being this familiar arcade cabinet setup. Gameplay-wise, what we have here is a nice slick platformer where the levels progressively get cartoonishly hectic. You have this retro throwback that lovingly wears its influences on its sleeve, mixed with the kind of blood-gushing violence you'd see in like a 2000s Newgrounds game. Between your dodge roll, wall jumping, and Scrooge McDucking enemies with your chainsaw while charging up a shot from your boomstick. This one's pretty fun. You also have the ability to switch between the real world and the nightmare realm, which can open up different pathways and be pretty useful in avoiding certain enemy types in a pinch. Sure, stylistically, I think most would find this a little played out, but it is cool to see the fun ways they tackle elements from the show. There's a ton of visual charm and little gags, and this probably would have done a little bit better had it actually been released while the show was, still airing. It's a good time, but for 25 bucks, oof, that's a really steep asking price for what realistically is gonna be a 2-hour game. Even though it's low budget and may not have the voice talents of Bruce Campbell, it does prove that there's a willingness to work with different devs to license out Evil Dead as an IP, so who knows? Maybe one day we'll finally see how Ash made it out of Japan, or maybe we'll finally figure out what happened to Sam. I doubt it, though.
Enough! Okay, that's enough now. Now, Fistful, you give me some sugar, baby. Oh yes, yes. Oh yes.